Hi everyone, I'm Joe. Today it's time for me to do my first book haul in quite a while. This book haul may be called the Spring 2023 book haul. However, quite a few of the books in it go back 3 or 4 months to winter, and the reason for this is simply so I have more books, more variety, and hopefully a more interesting varied selection of genres and subjects to talk about in this video. Hopefully. The first of the books I'm going to talk about today, of which there are 13 in total by the way, is the only one that I have actually read in this video, thankfully, so this might be a familiar one, the rest are not going to be familiar. And that first book is Growing Up Weightless, written by John M. Ford. I recently read this as a buddy read with a friend of mine called Rachel, known as Claudie on BookTube, whom I will link in the description box below, of course. This is a relatively newer entry in the SF Masterworks series, and it's one that I am very happy to have read. And by the way, this is my first John M. Ford, and is definitely not going to be my last. Now, the idea of this is actually set on Luna, or the moon. It follows 2 points of view characters, namely a young man who is making a trip across Luna on essentially a lunar train with a group of his friends, and I'm not going to say why, but it's a sort of somewhat of a coming of age tale. And the other point of view is his father, who is a member of the government, and indeed one of the founding members of the lunar government. So as far as his son's concerned, he's a bit stuck in his ways and not very open-minded, but of course, you know, his dad thinks things about his son, and you know, they do get on, but of course they've got different opinions. They are different generations and drastically different because of the environment. This is one that both me and Rachel liked. We really enjoyed reading it, and the world building was interesting, let's say, because you get the impression that Ford creates this massive amount of world building behind the scenes, but he doesn't actually write an enormous amount of it in the book. I mean, if this was many other authors, this book would have been 3 times the length, you know, 600 to 700 pages. Ford gives you a hint that there might be, I don't know, a interesting environment and whole different sort of social setup just out of view over there. Gives you a few vague hints to it, and then carries on with the plot. And he doesn't go on about this other area or social structure or anything else, and that's curious, and one that I think was done really well. It left you thinking, makes you think, that's alternative. And yeah, I liked this book for that reason. It really was something rather different. The next book is The Secret of Life by Paul McAuley. Now, this will be the 4th maybe book that I've read by Paul McAuley, and indeed I didn't really look at the plot too heavily when I bought it. Basically, it's in the SF Masterworks. It's by Paul McAuley, and so far I've mostly liked and had some pretty interesting thoughts on his books, although one of them was a bit hit or miss, but it still had some interesting concepts, frankly. Hence why I've got this now. Now, I know this is set in the year 2026. It's actually set rather soon. And it's basically, there is some kind of organism in the Atlantic Ocean, or is it the Pacific Ocean? Yes, and this organism, various governments are obviously after it because this plant type thing, whatever it may be, or is obviously killing off the sea life. This is affecting, you know, global food production, of course, because, you know, so much of it is water based, and it's very much a case of where did this come from? Was it from a Chinese mission to Mars? Was it some kind of experiment on Earth? It's all secretive, the government agents involved, and I think it's, the sound of it, fairly sort of complicated and convoluted, and probably quite interesting. It talks about, you know, where would life come from and what would it look like when it's here, frankly. So this could be an interesting one. One that I'm actually looking forward to getting. The third book that I have to show you is the third and last of the SF Masterworks for this video, and that is Imperial Earth by Arthur C. Clarke. This is one of the newer SF Masterworks in the series. I believe this is only a few months old at this point. I have read quite a lot of books by Clarke at this point. I've read, 9 or 10, so I'm somewhat well versed in his writing, and frankly, Clarke has worked out rather well for me so far. The concept of this is set in the year 2276. And basically, it's a book, as you might kind of guess by the first word of the title, Imperial. It's basically an Earth that has spread out to the stars, become rather imperialistic, hence basically the British Empire. Clarke was an English author, and has, at least as far as Earth is concerned, done rather well with colonising many other planets. And now they've got representatives and people coming from virtually every other colony and every other planet they've managed to get to, coming back to Earth for some great celebration, essentially to say, look how great Earth is, look how well we've done, you should all basically carry on sort of following basically our orders, because look how well we've sort of managed to do everything. Very much colonialistic in that era, but in space. Obviously Clarke will invest in some rather curious concepts to essentially explore the ideas of colonialism and that colonialistic and expansionistic view of empire building. And I know there is obviously a group that comes back to Earth to part of the celebration, and they're not exactly there only to celebrate. Obviously, whether it's some kind of underhand thing, I do not know, but obviously they're there for ulterior reasons, and obviously events spiral outward, and it should be a very interesting idea and interesting read. So I'm quite interested in reading this, and I do like the cover, by the way, as well. The next book that I'm going to talk about is one of the physically largest books in terms of actual sheer size, and that is Wings of Renewal, Solarpunk Dragon Anthology, edited by Claude Arseneault and Brenda J. Pierson. Hopefully I didn't mangle those names. I did try to look how you pronounce them, and I couldn't find anything. I'm just having to do the best I can. This is a short story collection, and unsurprisingly it is to do with dragons. I believe it is all to do with very much obviously solarpunk, but so it's sort of ecology, renewable resources, and dragons. So normally, solarpunk and renewable resources is normally its own thing. You normally have elements of technology in it, of course, or quite a lot of technology in some cases. Sometimes it can be almost fantasy-like. Normally though, dragons don't usually come into renewable resources. So these are stories that feature dragons in some way. I do not know how obviously they're going to feature, but this sounds like it's going to be a very curious collection, and one that I've had my eye on for a number of years, and frankly I haven't got around to. I mean, this was somewhat expensive at the time, sadly, which is why I've been trying to buy it until it's gone on offer, and it did slightly go on offer though, so hence why I bought it then. And this is one that I also think has an amazing cover, and I have a feeling that certain people that I know might like this. Weirdly, just because of the cover, a friend of mine, Kelsey, I just think this book, I could just see her talking about this book. I'm not sure whether she'd enjoy it, but just because of the cover, the name, it's easy to see Kelsey talking about this book. The next book that I am going to talk about is Defying Doomsday, edited by Tsana, Dolicha and Holly Kench. Now, I bought this book entirely because a friend of mine, someone I mentioned earlier, Rachel, in Colonnade, she talked about this and read it, and she's very enthusiastic, as she always is. Apparently this sounded really, really good when she talked about it. That is what she's good at, making me want to read books. So, I have to thank her for making me want to read another book. Again, this is a short story collection. Again, this one is, well, you can tell by the title, Defying Doomsday. This is stories that are least on the initial glance, appear to be quite dark and gloomy, but I suspect personally that these might actually have more hope and optimism in them than first meets the eye, which is often the case even when you say Doomsday. Yes, it might be Doomsday, but you've got to do the best you can in a world that's ripped apart and destroyed. The people are trying to do something to carry on, to continue. So I think there's actually be more optimism in this personally than meets the eye. And it should be a interesting selection. I mean, the sort of bottom tagline of the book is, how would you survive the apocalypse? Doesn't exactly sound cheerful, but I have a feeling it might be. I mean, I'm an optimist by nature, so that's kind of easy for me to say, but this one is an interesting collection. I could just say, considering that this is not a particularly big book, this is strangely heavy. I mean, this is actually one of the heaviest books in this book haul, and yet it's certainly not the biggest. I mean, it must have remarkably, the paper must be quite thick or something. I'm not sure. I'll have to examine it afterwards. The next book that I'm going to talk about is by the same editor, and that is Rebuilding Tomorrow. And this one is again because of Rachel, Claudie BookTube. She talked about this one enthusiastically, very close time frame to the previous book as well. And this is very much kind of a companion almost to the other one. That was obviously how do you survive it. This is what would you do after society's collapsed for whatever reason, and how would you go about readily rebuilding and trying to recover the world, society, or just your local community, or even just you and your house and your family directly. And this is a section of short stories. I have no doubt the stories in it are going to be really varied and really quite interesting. It will be, as I said about the previous book, I expect have more hope in it. I mean, frankly, this sounds more hopeful by just the raw definition on the back to the previous book, so this should be more optimistic than that, of which I do appreciate. I mean, I'm an optimistic person, so stories about recovery after a traumatic event. I mean, these obviously could be metaphors for personal growth and personal development after somebody suffered a great loss or some sort of psychological damage in some way. So it could be referencing to that as far as the title goes as well. So it should be an interesting collection and one that I'm looking forward to. And the title and the rather soft, sort of softly drawn artwork, I just think is really nice as well. I think it's really quite impressive. Next up is an unusual book for me in any book, or indeed for my channel in general, as it's actually a non-fiction, which is strange, and it's not a science fiction related non-fiction as well. This is The Gene, An Intimate History by Siddhartha Mukherjee. This is all about genetics and DNA. This I have to blame and thank Rachel yet for again. So, but Rachel, I apologise, but you're going to get a lot of blame and thanks today. And this is basically because Rachel made this sound really quite interesting. Rachel has a massive interest and enthusiasm in the subject of genetics and DNA. She read multiple books on the subject and she's highly knowledgeable on it. My knowledge on it is more along the lines of I've watched some other media and just odd things I've picked up from many years of being immersed in science fiction and that area, frankly. It's the sort of thing that I am interested in, genetics and manipulation and that sort of thing. I mean, I don't know whether CRISPR comes into this book. I don't think it does. I mean, this is like the history of it, but I wouldn't be surprised if he mentions the idea of the CRISPR technology, which is a more recent technology to do with DNA and genetics. But this should be an interesting read. It's surprisingly longish book, although maybe not surprising considering genetics and DNA is obviously a rather complex subject, and one that I'm curious about myself. I mean, frankly, because of Rachel keeps talking about genetics and over the last so many years and her enthusiasm for it, it's made me want to know more myself now, rather than just sort of picking it up and knowing odd things here or there because of other books. Now I actually want to try and know something a bit more properly, or sort of slightly more formal, I basically call it. So this should be an interesting one, and I am quite interested in getting around to it. The next set of books is the penultimate set, and this is 3 of them, and that is the last 3 books in the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. The 3 books that comprise this series are Persepolis Rising, Tiamat's Wrath, and Leviathan Falls. James S.A. Corey is actually not one person, but it is actually a pseudonym of 2 people. That is Daniel Abraham and Ty Franks. They co-write these and publish them as James S.A. Corey. The Expanse is, at this point, I think really well known. They made it into a big budget series on Amazon a couple of years ago. I think it only ended, was it the start of last year or the year before? So it's only just finished. And the 9th book, Leviathan Falls, was only just released about 2 months ago in paperback, and I am really interested and curious to get to the finale of where the Expanse is going, because frankly at this point these are big space opera with a big selection of characters and a selection of environments, and you've got this big dramatic events happening in other galaxies and possibly and battles and all these things, and it's just really wide-ranging plot. It feels very personal and very sort of cozy almost in some ways, because it's all about this one small crew of this one ship called the Canti, and it's like, yeah, it's this wide-ranging plot, yet it feels personal and intimate. It's an interesting combination, and one that I think works really well, and I am very excited to get finally to finishing off the series. And to be honest, I may have read one of these books by the time this video is goes live. And the last set of books is another set of 3, this time a trilogy, and that is the Farian War by K.B. Wages. This is a follow-on trilogy to her Indran War, which is what I nearly called this a minute ago, hence my hesitation. The 3 books that make up this trilogy are There Before the Chaos, Down Among the Dead, and finally Out Past the Stars. These are ones I've been wanting to read for a while. I really liked the first trilogy that I read by K.B. Wages. This follows the same main character, who is called Hale Bristol. Obviously this time, she's a very interesting female lead character, and one that's very forceful with her personality, and this should be an interesting one, and I'm quite excited to get to this, because the Hale Bristol character is a fun one and it's quite different, and I'll be very happy to get around to this. I really am. So with that said, that is all of the books I'm going to talk about, and indeed all of the books for probably quite a while, because I don't think I'm going to buy too many more books. Now hopefully, if I don't drop all these on the floor, if you have read any of these books, or you would like to know more information, I will do my best to answer, then please leave a comment. Let me know if you've bought any interesting books lately and you think that I might be interested in knowing about them. All the links to these books, as well as a link to Rachel and indeed to Claudie, as I did briefly mention her, will be found in the description box below. And that is it for this video, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you another day. Bye for now.